Okay, I'm recording now. Hi, I'm John Ryan with Broadsheet, and you're very welcome. This is the sixth in a series of programs we're doing on the Mother and Baby Home Report. I'm joined again by adoptee and activist Eunan Duffy. Hello, Eunan.
Hi, John. How are you?
Very well. And Breeda Murphy, who's a Tuam campaigner with the Tuam Mother and Breeda
Baby Home Alliance.
The Tuam Mother and Baby Home Alliance. And what a week we've had. Breeda, can I come to you first? Both of you have been both on the airwaves responding to the response to the report. Breeda, can you describe the week?
The week has been difficult because everybody wants to speak to us now, and they expect us, we have to respond almost immediately and give a fairly in-depth report on how we see things and how our survivors are feeling. And really you can capture that anyway on all of the radio stations, including more particularly the chat shows like Joe Duffy's, where people are feeling they felt so disempowered by the report, which really did not deliver. It promised so much, and I think if it takes 6 years, it's 6 years next month, to present a report that, again, not just disappoints, but in some cases, it has really disregarded the amazing, honest and courageous interviews that our people, our members, and all across the country have given. And then they don't recognize themselves within anything that's captured within the report. And we're told by those who write the executive summary that it's nuanced and it's too complex to capture therein. But really no effort is made, in my opinion, to provide the narrative that is the truthful narrative to people, so that people like our members can feel they are believed. The problem is that they feel they are disbelieved and that they have made up certain pieces of their evidence, which of course is untrue. They've unburdened, they have told their stories, and now the avenue for them is to go on the national airwaves and tell those stories again. And people who haven't told actually are coming forward now because they're incensed to see that their colleagues or the people who have been in the homes who relate their stories are not being respected for having done so.
Eunan, have you had a chance to read the full report, or even to see the full report? I mean, I know survivors have been sent copies, but have you had a chance, Eunan, to read it fully?
Yes, John, I've downloaded the full report as anyone can off the government website. I got a hard copy of the executive summary, confidential committee, etc. And I've read some of it because of the media work, obviously, this week, and also new established contacts. Calls from people that were in mother and baby institutions as well. With some of us have been dealing with these sort of the new approaches, as Breeda has alluded to. You know what I mean? When you get the fresh impetus and the momentum, you don't know how long or short-lived it's going to be, and you have to take advantage of the opportunities. However sort of distressing and absolutely draining it is psychologically and emotionally as well. I've spoken to many people over this last week, and because of course we have an imminent research report coming out ourselves in the north, hopefully sometime next week. So it's difficult because this is hard to manage, John, in normal circumstances. But when you get a commission report, basically, that has done it seems like it's very best to try and trivialize and minimize and euphemize a lot of what the testimonies and the history of the institutions involved. I mean, it's incredibly disconcerting. It creates that much despondency and despair. A lot of victim survivors would have been very hopeful about what might have come out in the Commission's report, despite the fact that it's extremely limited and it's narrow terms of reference, etc., etc. So it's about managing expectations sometimes, and the leak of the information before the report immediately put victims and survivors on the back foot as well.
But I've noticed
because of course they were given assurances, John, you know what I mean, in their circumstances, that because you are the people affected, it's only right, it's only natural justice, that, as I would say, that you, the people, actually get to see sight of this report before anybody else does. So the letdown even started in terms of the media leak before we even got any sight of the report. And unfortunately, this week we've actually had the same sort of incidents here in the north in terms of leaking content of the research that's supposed to come out next week. So we've had a mirror image, a complete replication of what happened in the south, despite the public outrage, etc., etc., you know.
Yeah, Breeda, thanks, Eunan. Breeda, just on the reaction to the report, I'm encouraged in a sense that there has been a lot of outrage, in the sense that the McAleese report didn't get the same kind of rigor that people are going through the report. Catherine Connolly's speeches in the Dáil. There's a different sense of outrage at the moment that I didn't detect after the McAleese report.
Not immediately after the McAleese report, and this has, I suppose, what has happened is it's the effect after so many various reports investigating, and the state has this habit of, you know, alienating one group against another. I've said before that when they investigated on the Magdalene, the McAleese inquiry, and provided an apology in 2013, and were found in 2017, you know, that they had not included the women that should have been included therein, and then purposely, not accidentally, they left those women out. But at the same time, they also left out the children of the women. The very reason that Tuam had, for instance, the Galway County Council placed women who had become pregnant for the second time it was their policy to place them within a Magdalene laundry. So you would wonder why they, at that point, did not get the apology. And so the survivors, many survivors have been through 1, 2, 3 institutions. And I don't know why, as a state, we cannot be honest and deal once and for all with the many injustices that we know of. We know of because we hear them, we believe them. And the state seems all the time to deflect and to place the blame back on victim survivor, or when it comes to redress as regards Magdalene. The state sought those women to provide evidence of actually being in the home. You know, where would you get evidence if you were 12, 13, 14 years of age and incarcerated, working alongside the women of the Magdalene? So I think the outrage this time is due to the fact that survivors had their hopes dashed again, but they had those hopes raised because we've waited 6 years. We've not been able to get the evidence. And, you know, the Commission of Inquiry can retrieve every piece of evidence, including the McAleese report evidence that is with the Taoiseach. It seems most unfair because, quite honestly, I think people like us should be writing our own papers to come out quite strongly in support of people like Catherine Connolly, who sees it as it is. I mean, she's possibly one of the best speakers in Dáil Éireann, and this time she spoke with passion and really raised survivors because they've been so dejected this week, and it comes across on the radio shows that there's nothing you know, better than having a survivor tell their story, because they are the people who can really challenge what the commissioners, and the sad fact being that the commissioners themselves have not come out to explain the findings and the reason we understand the narrow remit. We understood that from the beginning. We knew it wasn't going to deliver absolutely everything, but some of the remarks contained in it are deeply, deeply hurtful, and they should explain those.
Well, Martin McAleese really explained he was never asked about his report as such. He introduced it and that was it. We never heard from him again. This is Martin McAleese. At least he was there to launch his report. We haven't seen the three members of the commission, well, ever really, except from when it launched in 2015.
I would have thought they would have been there because we're living with COVID and everybody is dependent on technologies now. And, you know, the technology does not actually suit our particular group because they're aged 60 up to 90. You know, and they're not able to do the Zoom calls and everything else.
Yeah.
But I would have thought that the commissioners, many of the survivors are younger, of course, and even to 1973 were the cutoff point. We don't agree with that, of course, as we said last week. So the commissioners should certainly have come out, and I hope they will. And I believe the committee, one of the Oireachtas committees has invited or is to invite them to attend there. And at least then we would see, you know, some statements made that might explain a little further the rationale behind their various statements that make no sense to anybody.
No, and I was again encouraged, and I'm sure you were, by was it Regina Doherty over the weekend, who suggested that the government simply would reject the report. Did you hear that, Breeda? Sorry, my connection was. Did you hear that? Did you hear that?
No, I didn't. Your connection, John, it was a bit.
Very sorry. I was talking about Regina Doherty at the weekend suggested the government reject the report, just simply reject it. I know Mary McAleese was on the same programme and said it was profound and scholarly, but just to concentrate on Regina, I mean, is that possible for the government just to reject it out of hand, or not accept it and tell them to go back and finish it?
No, I don't think that's possible to just reject out of hand, but I would like to see a greater understanding, or have a greater understanding as to why and how come they've presented a report to the most vulnerable of people in the manner they have.
Sorry, Breeda, I meant reject the findings.
I didn't hear that.
I meant to reject the findings, that's all. I beg your pardon.
Reject the findings, yeah.
Not
you know, the government could, yeah. Well, they could reject the findings and they could ask for the executive summary to be rewritten in a more appropriate way, I think, because that's the most hurtful part. And various, you know, the vaccine trials, the fact that forced adoptions did not happen. I mean, there's ample evidence that they did.
Yeah, Eunan, you want to come in there?
Yeah, well, I think it's very worrying that the Irish government has already stated that it's content to implement all the recommendations of the report.
Yeah.
So that in itself shows you a completely negligent mindset and a psyche they have towards how we might be going even forward here. John, you know, in terms of the McAleese report, there was a UN Human Rights Commissioner that came to the 26th countries 2016 and did a report in 2017. And in reference to McAleese, he basically says, this is the best example he has ever found of how not to conduct an investigation. So that's an incredible statement. You know what I mean? What an absolute, that's as grave a criticism you're going to get of any kind of an investigation as abhorrent as McAleese was. And I suppose some of the other despair that victim survivors, adopted people, all of those affected really feel is that despite 20 years of all sorts of investigations, people keep thinking, you know, some grave mistakes have been made. grave irregularities, some unsubstantiated statements that have been made in the back of these reports. And people keep thinking, surely this is not going to happen again. But it keeps happening all the time, and it gets worse. Like, one of the things that there's been major anomalies around is the fact that the testimonies themselves, they were not contractual. So there was no contract instigator for these testimonies, which has caused all sorts of untold problems. Borne out by even Noel Brown appearing in the Late Late Show last week, which was talking about at least 10 inaccuracies, I think it was, of her own testimony. This basically means that, you know, I mean, the Commission has been wholly negligent, and I suppose, I mean, the way they've conducted themselves, they have no contract for these testimonies in the first place, so that people could basically verify and validate their testimonies, that they would have complete control over their testimonies, but nothing could be done with their testimonies without their permission. So they put these people on a pedestal of giving them basically false empowerment, made them give testimonies under whatever circumstances, and then basically said, you know what, we potentially then can actually change and amend your testimonies regardless of how you want us to be believing you, which of course creates the problem that when people are going in under a false premise of believability, it's all basically, the rug is pulled from them. And even the fact that the commissioners were cold calling people in the days and weeks running up to the Commission's report release just shows you how important that the contract actually was, because they would never have been in that position if a contract had been implemented from the start, because it meant basically that within the contract there would have been stipulations and obligations and options for people to say, well, if I give my testimony, I have a chance to then go back and amend it, or even withdraw it at some point in the future. That's what control is. That's what empowerment is. That's, you know what I mean, for us that would be standard, that would be carried out. I mean, it's absolutely apprehensible, the things that's happened, and the Commission have done themselves absolutely no favour whatsoever. And Breeda rightly says, you know, the likes of Judge Eunan Murphy, if nobody else is going to come out, let them stand in front of everybody and actually try and substantiate some of the absolutely contrary statements that they've made, the way they've belittled a lot of the abuses and the illegitimacy. You know, it's absolutely staggering. There's so many anomalies and contradictions in this report. And for me, McAleese, to come out, given what Martin McAleese did, I mean, it's absolutely staggering for her to come out and call this a scholarly report, because so many people are absolutely ripping this report to shreds.
Breeda, just on the rejection of the report and the rejection of the findings, is there any mechanism by how that can happen? So politically, in terms of, does O'Gorman just say to the Commission, I mean, are the Commission finished their work now, effectively? So it would require a new Commission, would that be?
I think we have to, you know, work with politicians to see how we get this, get justice really, because it has cost 11.5 million, you know, and there was another 11.5 million left over. And when a report like that is done by the government, or well, it wasn't the government, it was handed over to the judicial system, but they have all of the resources, and they've had various historians write various parts. So I think working with the politicians in opposition to ensure that survivors are heard and their needs are taken on board, and that there is a resolution. Because right now, to read a report that is so at odds in its introduction and statements, that against so much at odds with what the survivors testified to and what they told, and then not to be able to recognize part of that. I know there were over 500 that gave their testimonies to the Commission, and it's impossible to include everyone, but it seemed slanted to believe anything provided by the church or state and question anything, any statement made. And we had this before about the McAleese report. We'd flagged this before, that, you know, it needs to be an honest and reflection of how Irish society was, because families did not do this. Fathers of the children, yes, there were bad fathers. Not every one of them were. Some of the fathers were actually very good and wanted to stand by the girl who became pregnant, that they loved. They wanted to rear their own child too. So, you know, it's wrong to demonize those and raise up the society that or the institutions that caused in the first place the power, the absolute corruption of power that caused families then who were so poor to try to hide their loved one in a place that they felt was a safe refuge where they could give birth. And the intergenerational aspect of this, there was a lady speaking today on Joe Duffy, her grandmother and her mother and she herself had gone through the institutions. Now, there's something seriously wrong there, and she only found out much of her mother's history after her mom had passed away. So it wasn't always clear to her, you know, and it seems Ireland fails again and again the most vulnerable of its people. I think it's, you know, it's a real tragedy. It's almost insurmountable for us as advocates and as survivors and families of survivors to overcome it alone, because without international observers such as this morning, the Special Rapporteur on Trafficking and the Sale of Children spoke out in favour of survivors, to say that from the outset she had flagged the fact that it was a very narrow remit and was unlikely, therefore, to deliver. But even the figures, you know, when you see 9,000 children, there are far more than 9,000 children. Yeah. And who is to say that a child did not die because of a vaccine trial that went wrong? How come, you know, we do not know that they did not become seriously ill and either pass away or have a lifelong illness as a result? So it's unclear on those terms.
And also on the mixed race children, Breeda, we were going to discuss that this week, in fact. But even in regards to those children, there was no prejudice that they detected as regards their, you know, the color of their skin, which has been completely contradicted by so many people at this stage.
Yeah, and yeah, it is so contradictory. And Eunan has another aspect to that because of the starvation orders, which Rosaline spoke about this week. Eunan, do you want to elaborate on that?
Please.
Yeah. Well, as far as I can see, the report has discriminated against the discrimination. You know what I mean? That it's clearly abdicated its duties and trying to expose all of the discrimination. And you know what I mean? Some of us know that all of these different types of institutions that have been referred to, for example, in the Commission's report, for example, at one stage it says, it tries to, I suppose, make the victims and survivors of mother and baby institutions actually grateful for the fact that they could have been in industrial schools, when it said that they couldn't find any evidence of gross abuses. Now, that covers a whole plethora of issues there, in terms of how they actually look at the abuse of a child that's separated from his mother, and then to compare it with, obviously, with industrial schools. For me, it was like, I said this on media earlier this week, that it's basically like telling industrial school children that okay, you guys got it bad, but you could have ended up in a Nazi concentration camp. You know, so to draw these comparisons and parallels and basically create a scale of abuse is absolutely abhorrent, and it's so disrespectful as well. But as Breeda says, You know, the psychiatric institutions have never been investigated. They again are another marginalised group of people that have never had all of their grievances, their concerns, their abuses, all brought to any kind of a state investigation. And a number of years ago, I met up with a woman who came from Tipperary, and she now lives in the north of Ireland. And basically, she got in contact with me, and she told me an absolutely horrific, harrowing story, which Fran Curry on Tip FM covered yesterday for a while. And basically, the starvation order that Breeda refers to was a part of legislation of the 1945 Emergency Powers Act, brought in by the Irish government, and it effectively was brought in to chase down any deserters of the Irish Army that would have went and joined the British Army. But this lady's particular case meant that as a child, she was actually punished for the fact that they couldn't get a hold of her dad, who had actually allowed her two brothers and his two sons to join the British Army. And so they were effectively trying to punish him, but instead of punishing him, they couldn't get a hold of him. And the order was then passed down to this lady as a young child, where she was effectively held captive in the basement of her own house. Part of the conditions of the flogging of the starvation order was that she had to be flogged by her family several times a week, and the guards would actually come round to check that the family was actually flogging the girl as a young child. So she put up with that for a number of years. Rats, etc., were coming into the basement. She wasn't allowed to be fed, but her father would creep back every now and again, and he would even throw her in a cabbage or a lettuce or something to feed her. And eventually, when she came to adolescent years, then the Sisters of Mercy from St. Luke's and Clonmel eventually came, took her out of the house, brought her to St. Luke's and Clonmel, held her captive there, put her through electrotherapy treatment and a nuclear vaccine trial, which part of meant stainless steel being crushed down into powder form and injected into her bloodstream. And as part of that, she had to be made anemic because that was part of the trial. So the woman had this done. She ended up in a coma. She was in a coma for several weeks. And she came out of the coma. She had all sorts of health conditions, obviously with the effects of the stainless steel being injected into her bloodstream. And she could no longer speak English. She was speaking an older Japanese form of language, and everybody was absolutely incredulous as to what happened to the woman. So to cut a long story short, she eventually escaped St. Luke's and Clonmel, but she did tell us that while she was there was a whole array of birth mothers there who were all sent there to have their babies. And she formed particular relationships with some of these birth mothers. So this, at the end of the day, exposes the whole nexus, the whole connection, the interconnection there was between all of the institutions, whether there were industrial schools, reformatories, mother and baby institutions, Magdalene laundries. There was pathways, a network between each and every one of them. And the Commission actually does cite that, you know what I mean, that they've seen the exit pathways of a number of well, they actually play it down a bit because they said most of the women, in fact, actually left the mother and baby institutions with their children, which is completely false. And as I say, you know what I mean, the evidence is there, not just from the children themselves, in terms of some of the paperwork that they've got, but the state knows fine well what the pathways were for a lot of these mothers, because a lot of them ended up going to England. Some of them couldn't go back to their families. There's a whole range of things, but the Commission itself, again, tries to dilute and actually expresses in some cases itself where it could not even get access to some of the institutional records. For example, Tuam, they only seen 20% of the records for Tuam in terms of the exit pathways for some of the women and the children that left Tuam. So Roderick Gorman stood up in the Dáil the other day, and he basically says that they're looking at actually using legal compulsion to go back and try and get the institutional records now. And I would say basically good luck with that, because if these commissioners can't get these records, and a lot of the people, those affected, can't get their records, people like us would have absolutely no faith that would happen, because the institutions themselves have already cited countless arsons, the fact that they don't hold so many records have been destroyed. They've, through years and years of just actually being there, they've withered away and they're not readable. They've used every excuse under the sun. So effectively, in terms of trying to get those records, you would have to carry out a sort of an Al Capone style thing, where you're actually going into somewhere, breaking down doors in the middle of the night, going in and taking computers and hard disk drives and seizing every kind of a record file and document that's held and by the religious orders. That's really the only way you're going to bring any conclusion to some of this stuff, John.
Yeah, and by the sounds of it, they'd have shredded a lot of the records, a lot of the files, a lot of the evidence. By the sounds of it, Breeda, can I ask you just your members? Did they have their testimony changed in the report? Do they have evidence, or do they have their? Sorry.
They haven't said. One man recognised himself in his testimony, and actually it was before it was published, and it was in the Sunday Independent article, which is why I've written to the Press Ombudsman and to the Sunday Independent. Now, the Press Ombudsman has reverted to me, but not the Sunday Independent as yet.
Sorry.
But certainly, I think it's clear from the testimonies on the radio and from what survivors and like Noel Brown has said, that verbatim testimonies were not included, and so if there's paraphrasing and anything like that, it's unsafe, because if you paraphrase the words of a survivor, it can mean something entirely different. So I wonder how that stands up.
And do you mind me asking?
Yeah.
The member you mentioned, was the meaning changed? Did he feel in the leak in the Sunday Independent was a paraphrase, his feelings paraphrased to a degree that it was inaccurate?
No, it wasn't a large article, as you know. It was a mention of him, or it appeared to be him. It didn't include his name, but he recognised himself in that. No, but what I'm saying is that of the survivor testimonies, those who've spoken for the Bethany Group and who have talked on national radio, they've been adamant that they are not covered within the report. They do not see their own testimonies there, and if anything, their suffering is played down and not given equal weight. And that's what we've seen before, the weight of the contribution by the religious orders or the state itself. It carries far more than that of the survivor, which leads them to believe, or to think themselves, do you actually believe what we've told you? And for some survivors going to the confidential committee, it was their first time telling their story. There was the most harrowing story on Tip FM of a 17-year-old who gave birth in St. Pat's, and she had 6 weeks after giving birth returned to get her child, and her child was not
dampened down some of what we all believe. Then you've no problem in saying, right, okay, if that's the way it is, that's fine. But the problem is that it's went about this imaginary and, I suppose, false truth-telling process here, where despite an abundance of evidence to the contrary of what they've been saying, they've went on ahead. And you're talking about the confidential committee there, Breeda, and the executive summary. I mean, the differences in both are so stark and striking, it's unbelievable. It's like the people involved in drawing up this report have basically had different roles to play, different accounts to try and correlate, different exercises to do within the report. And it's like they brought them all to Judge Eunan Murphy on the last day, and they've said, there's mine, there's mine, there's mine. And there's been no coherence. Nobody sat down and tried to pull them all together and actually, analysed it, scrutinised it, and says, hold on, we can't say this because that's a complete contradiction of what was said there. You know what I mean? It's a completely haphazard, slapdash report in so many respects. And as I say, there are people a lot smarter than me have actually torn this to absolute shreds and said
Yeah.
they cannot believe the way this commission, after nearly 6 years, has delivered a report, and instead of solidifying and substantiating the vast evidence of the abuses and the human rights violations, it's actually, you know, absolutely criminalized. In fact, a lot of the people that actually took part in it.
Yeah, that is a devastating statement, that it's criminalized the people who are trying to find justice. Almost the authors of the report. What now, Breeda, though? Just because we've got about a minute and a half left. What now in terms of survivors groups getting the changes that you want and getting the redress that you need, etc.? I mean, what are the practical steps now you're going to take? Can you hear that?